So you look at the iron supplementation, and if you see the results over the last 40, 50 odd years, only 13.5 or 14% of the kids have benefited. So there's something that is seriously wrong with supplementation. So then we saw that there was a relevance of fortified cereals to come and address this big public health issue here. The part of the brain that controls our behavior does not control language. So therefore, we are not able to articulate most often why we really do, and why, what's the reason behind it. So we are never able to rationalize that. Also, what you find is some foods might be disliked, but because you've introduced them early, at a later period, the same foods are appreciated by the kid. So there is a memory that the kid would have about this food, which stays embedded. So therefore, it's so important that because the child is disliking a food or not appreciating something, the mother still needs to invest the time and not just mask it with taste. Because if we all know, kids don't have any taste to begin with. And even look at our, the celebration of the Annaprashana, so which happens at 4 months or 6 months. There's so much rational to it. Today, the West is realizing the importance of the Annaprashana and where carbohydrate like rice or wheat gets introduced, and what it could do if you're introducing it early or you're introducing it too late.
Okay. One thing no one knows about you.
I'm a fairly good cook. My wife knows it, and she's seen me do it a couple of times, but I'm a fairly good cook. I can cook quite a few dishes.
Hello, fellows. Welcome to the next episode of Jagged with Just Ravi. Subscribe to my channel for conversations at the edge with thought leaders from the marketing, branding, and the business world. Conversations that ignite new ideas with rough and sharp edges. Hello, PD. Welcome to my show.
Hello, Just Ravi. It's great to be on your show. I've been following your show for quite some time, and I'm very stoked to be part of this conversation today. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much for coming over. So, PD, if I requested you to tweet your profile, what would you say?
If I were to describe myself, I'm a dreamer. I believe that human beings are inherently good, and they have a they have a reason and a purpose for their existence. And I'm also an explorer of the metaphysical. So I'll probably dwell on that a little later in the conversation. But my passion lies between reimagining human experiences by fundamentally rethinking, in fact, and redesigning how people interact. And that is, and my aim is to enhance the quality of lives of people. And therefore, the choices that I made in my career is also kind of aligned with that. Now, in terms of my career, I've spent close to 21 odd years, 2 decades, having worked with large global and Indian MNCs across various industries, starting with FMCG, CPG, healthcare, and currently working with the building and construction sector. So it's been a fascinating journey. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, lovely. Lovely how you defined yourself through the consumer lens and how you're interested in their well-being. And that kind of is a great hub, a great interface and intersection of actually your experience. How did you get into marketing? Because, like I can imagine you being interested in people and many things to do with people,
Yeah.
having many interests. So, and in these 22 years, there's been so much of change. Now they're saying marketing 4.0, and I'm like 3.0 happened, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So how has this impacted you as a person and as a marketing leader?
It's again a very interesting question, So, see, I mean, typically, like everyone, I started my career in sales. Went through the challenges as a salesperson, and then moved on into marketing. Now, joining marketing was always a deep interest because of my interest in people. I really had a passion for understanding people and how they behaved. And I think this also was there was a convergence of interest in the aspects of marketing which revolved around, let's say, advertising, a desire to also drive business growth through strategic communication. So all of this combined led me into this path of marketing. And to your question on how the industry has changed dramatically, in fact, 4.0, marketing 4.0 is something that we, I think it's a very interesting phase for marketing as such. Now, how the industry has changed, I mean, if you were to look at it, when we started off, there was, it was all mass media, right? Now, digital transformation has become very real. This is still, I still feel these are early days, and therefore there's going to be a massive shift in the whole way that we communicate and how we market, how we do our marketing. The other thing that has changed is the whole approach to data. Now, most of the decisions that you see are being taken with the lens of data and with insights, which wasn't the case earlier to begin with. I think the third element, which has also kind of changed, is this whole consumer empowerment. Consumers have become more aware. There's a lot of discernment. They're very clear on the choices. Therefore, as a marketer, you're always challenged. So it is no more the passive audience that you targeted through your mass media or your broadcasting, your messaging. The other aspect that has also changed is this whole personalization. It's not just about engaging them, but it's about hyper personalization, reaching out and really being very targeted. It's almost like you're talking to the consumer. So that becomes a very big challenge for marketeers, especially because we are right brain people. We are thinking of one singular message and how do we communicate to our consumer. But that becomes a challenge with this whole hyper personalization that's coming in a very big way. And the last element where I think where we are now getting a little bit more overwhelmed is this whole content marketing. And I think within that context of content marketing, it's also the frame on which your content is being created and then developed, and how you are then, kind of sharing it with your audience. So I think those are the typical changes that I see, which has happened. And then mass marketing to the micro moment marketing. You really, and then there was a lovely document which Google released about the zero moment of truth, and in fact that was further expanded, into the first moment of truth and the second moment of truth and the third moment of truth. So the various truths, and you need to be relevant as a brand across each and every across those moments of truth. So those are the changes that I see with the marketing 4.0, and this has also created a lot of flux in the industry, around the thinking of, let's say, omni-channel experience. I think that space is still evolving. Community and influencer marketing. I think I'm not sure you're aware of the brand Glossier, a beauty brand which kind of transformed itself from just being from a blogging space to a multi-billion brand. So that's the kind of work that they did around this whole community and influencer marketing. And then data-driven marketing, which is again still in the initial stages, as I said, with now generative AI, chat GPT, and all of them emerging. So I think that's really going to undergo a massive shift. Yeah. So that's how I look at marketing 4.0.
All good changes, I would say, all good for the consumer. Like you said, empowered, and the choice in their hands. And the marketing has to evolve and fast. So amazing. Now, PD, in all this content, influencer, and I remember having a lot of discussions for one of a few of those brands that we work together, and a lot of evolution of thinking, and with conventional and what's the real truths today. So as I see your journey, PD, there's been a lot of companies which are very, very focused on nutrition, well-being. Um, Dr. Reddy's, Nestle,
Kellogg.
Kellogg's, yeah. So all these companies have been on where, even if it's not been food, nutrition has definitely been part of it. Functional foods or supplemented or fortified. So let's pick up some examples, and to howsoever context, real context, because that's the value addition that practitioners get for the audience, is that they can tell behind the scenes kind of
Yes.
anecdotes, which becomes very interesting, which only you can tell, nobody can tell. So if we start with Dr. Reddy's,
Sure.
and let's see, very, very unique kind of nutritional products. Now, this is somebody who has a condition. I'm talking Celevida. And then, of course, there was the gummies as well, Celehealth. So for these, if you want to talk about how did you plan innovation, how did the integration across many functions happened for a consumer who is pretty, pretty disoriented with the changes that he has to suddenly make in his lifestyle, and the journey can become isolated, all the consumer truths that came about. But what were the actual real challenges that you were facing, if you wear your client's hat, um, dealing with either of these brands?
No, absolutely. And it's an interesting question again. I've completed the full cycle on nutrition, working with Nestle, working with on infant nutrition, and then moving to Kellogg, handling breakfast cereals, then looking at snacking, one of the world's largest companies in that space, and then looking at the kids' growth and development agenda, which was more from an emerging market, and then moving into a sports nutrition company like Glanbia, and then subsequently landing in Dr. Reddy's was an interesting journey. And to your question on Dr. Reddy's, so when I first landed there and I realized what we were dealing with, so the first thinking was, how do we really now start creating innovation within Dr. Reddy's, because they're extremely strong when it comes to their pharma credentials, one of the big pharma players in the country, and they've done things in a certain way. But when it comes to nutrition, how do we then integrate nutrition into their entire thinking, right? So that was the initial thinking from my end. Now, what we saw is we really need to rework the way we approach innovation. And when I say innovation is, you need to first understand the therapy segments that they were strong in and see what is the relevance of nutrition within those therapy segments. So that was the first line of thinking. The second line of thinking was, how do we drive innovation within that space? And there were three, kind of, I would say, frames that we worked on. One is the ideation to selection. Create a very strong ideation thinking, which is embedded with a lot of insight that you gather from the real consumers, the patients that we talk about, and then see what kind of products or ideas that could emerge from there and which would be relevant to them, and then put a selection process to it as to how do you bring them to life. So that was the first part. Now, as you work on that, the second part is then working with the experts, the key opinion leaders, the nutrition scientists, the medical experts, and then look at how do you select some of those ideas, bring in a bit of a nutrition edge, and then how do you take them towards development, which is working very closely with the R&D team. So that was the second frame. The third one was around developing and then launching it, which is around then creating a go-to market, which would kind of also support how Dr. Reddy's was approaching their typical GTM. So you're not making too many changes from that context. So that was the first one. And within the therapy that I said, how do you integrate was very important. But also, what was important is to really understand the continuum of cure to wellness, because and typically, if you look at how pharma functions, they really look at the whole cure segment. And even if someone, a patient becomes more or less fine, they're not in their optimal state of health. So therefore, there is a huge importance that one should stress upon when it comes to moving this person or this patient towards wellness, which wasn't happening. And therefore, we found that there was a relevance of nutrition to move in that space, in that thinking. The fourth element that came in very important, was very important to us, was the product differentiation. Now that you've got the product, how do you differentiate the product in the market? So we then started looking for novel ingredients that could be brought in, which could really benefit the patient significantly, and it could improve the overall health outcomes. So therefore, there was a lot of work that happened around the whole product development space itself, and a lot of time was spent in that area. And the last but not the least is to then say that we are not just going to give you another product that's going to give you a certain benefit or a certain feature, will have a certain USP about it, but we'll talk about the real world evidence here. So how does it translate into something meaningful for you? So if you're talking of a diabetic patient, when we speak about the brand, we spoke about how could it control your blood sugar, and could we make a promise that it could deliver that promise right from day one, so the patient feels reassured. Similarly, could it be clinically proven to improve the HDL, the good cholesterol, or could it help in in the weight management? So those were the real world evidences that we created with real people within the real environment. So that's the focus that we brought in.
Yeah.
Now, so that's what we typically did when it came to developing those products. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was very clear, although we kept talking, and I remember PD used to keep emphasizing that, this is a consumer product.
Yes,
It is a conditional nutrition, no, a conditioned nutrition,
condition nutrition. Yes.
conditioned nutrition. So this whole, and because it's come from Dr. Reddy, so the pillars were very clear, the science of it, the clinical proven part, a clear space in the patient's journey in terms of after cure, maintenance. And therein also how education is going to play a part. And even when we made the content pillars, it was very clear that, there'll be a lot of continuous education in an interesting manner that we'll have to keep doing. So the innovation, it's a very different challenge for somebody who comes from a Kellogg's and Nestle world.
Absolutely.
And you kept,
You're taking
yeah,
the science and then try and understand the medical relevance and then think about those areas. It was extremely challenging. I used to tell the team that there is a goal of therapy. The therapy has its own goals and its own outcomes. And nutrition also, when you're kind of bringing it together along with your goals of therapy, needs to also have its specific outcomes and its specific goals. And the integration of this is what we would typically call medical nutrition therapy. So then what you're doing is in conjunction with your medication, you're also bringing nutrition for the better health outcomes of your patients. So that is what we were trying to do. Otherwise, it would have been a difficult exercise. If both were running parallel, then Dr. Reddy's would not have seen great value in the on the nutrition side because the primary focus was on the drugs, on the therapy.
yeah. And that itself puts a lot in perspective, and that is very important because here's an expert doctor. Even if the relationship with the doctor of the consumer has changed, it's a different kind of an equation. It's not a god anymore. He's not
Yes.
going to give you a puri and it's done. You are going to challenge and question and seek second opinion, etc. But along with that, the medicine's role is out there, and this is just a supplement. And yet the role of the doctor in making sure the credibility is there, and how all the other brands in the landscape are also doing. So it was such a tough thing. I mean,
It was extremely
and
difficult.
differentiation and superiority, I mean.
And in fact, even creating that awareness within, so how do you then really communicate this to your internal audience and not just to the external world out there? And just to think of it, nutrition is so fundamental to how you would be, right? So take a cancer patient for an example. Typically, it's not the therapy which is the actual reason for the increased mortality or morbidity. Is the nutrition status. So when the patient first walks in, more or less fine, and then suddenly you see deterioration happening. Now, why is this happening? Is because as soon as the therapy kicks in, it is intensive therapy. We all know that, and therefore the nutrition status of the patient is also on a decline. The patient is losing muscle mass, there is nutritional inadequacy that creeps in, the patient is not able to eat well, and therefore what happens is there's sarcopenia that sets in, and over a period of time then it becomes cachexia. Now because of this, suddenly the patient's condition deteriorates, and then you're blaming either the doctor or the therapy, it hasn't worked, but it's actually the nutrition status which has declined and is the reason for this increased mortality or morbidity. Take any example. I mean, take the metabolic syndromes, whether it is diabetes, whether it is cardiac issues or whatever. You'll when you look back, it's actually the diet or the nutrition which is more important. We all know by the age of 30, you are losing muscle mass. You're almost losing 4 to 8% muscle mass every decade, and it accelerates after 40. Now, and sarcopenia sets in. Now, this accelerates these metabolic conditions. And as Indians, because of our phenotyping, we are predisposed, to this condition, and therefore we need to be more conscious about nutrition and food and the choices that we make.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that awareness was very, very important. Building that awareness inside the company as well as communicating to the external world was extremely important.
And all the time having the hat of empathy for the patient, like when you talked about the cancer patient, so there they are fighting, their body is fighting something, and you have to help them be strong, have empathy, and yet sell to them. I mean, that's another mindset. It's very different from just consumer marketing, like the
Absolutely.
ethics of it, the regulatory, the legalities. And I remember how in a lot of our discussions, there used to be medical stakeholders. So the doctor, what do you think? On both sides, there used to be doctors. So very interesting. and and very, very significant, something that must be handled with a lot of care. I
Absolutely.
remember, PD, I was talking to Louis Roy. Um, Again, he was in the design,
Yes.
section of
Makes
Dr.
sense
Reddy.
beyond years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And how, when they were talking cancer only, how they had to look at, when they started to look at the patient as a person, they saw the scope for an entire app, and
Absolutely.
then across multiple cultures.
Yes.
We are going to do something that gives them, it does not take from their identity, because something like a cancer is taking from their identity, their roles they are playing, their self-esteem,
Yes.
everything. And how do we empower them and give them community support, ideas for hair, so it's
Absolutely.
presentable, and so many things.
Absolutely.
So this is a completely new world that I think one enters when we look at
And
patients.
you're so right. You're so right. I mean, when you think about the consumer or the patient, it all starts with the consumer or the patient centricity. They are the heart of what you're trying to do. And if you don't understand their need, the undermet, sometimes it's the unmet need or the underserved. It's not typically the need. The needs might be met with so many options. But what is lacking? What are their anxieties? What are the tensions? What are their concerns? What are the challenges? And therefore, that empathy is extremely important. And we used to spend tons of our time just trying to understand that. And I typically say this: there are four C's that typically marketers are more interested with. I think the fifth C is equally important. While you look at the consumer, which is very, very important, it's also the culture. Since you spoke about that, look at a country like ours, such diverse food habits, different palate. So the same food is not had in the same way across two regions. Like the dosa down south is not the dosa that you find in the north. So therefore, our palates are very different, and therefore cultural understanding is equally important. So while you may understand all the other elements, and you might even understand the consumer, but also having that cultural understanding is equally important. So that becomes very, very important as you move along.
And hence the relationship with the disease itself sometimes changes. I remember
Sometimes changes, absolutely.
our starting point itself for diabetes was, let's see how it is in our culture,
And that's the
And
reason
it
why
was,
we created a regional flavor. I mean, the whole Kesar Ilaichi and the thinking behind it, not going with the typical, the vanilla and the chocolate flavor. So we said something that is more regionally and culturally relevant. Let's look at that as a flavor. Yeah,
yeah, because the challenge will be you have to be part of their food regime, not to be looked at as a dabba of powder, So another big challenge. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, and then how do you integrate into their lifestyle, into their food habits, so that they don't see that nutrition? It's not clinical, and I hate the word clinical nutrition, because at the end of the day, when you think about any food, you want to have it as a food, and I think taste is a primary driver. I mean, convenience obviously is one of the key drivers, but taste is an extremely important driver, and therefore you need to make it tasty enough for the patient to appreciate it. I mean, you can't treat this like another medication, right? And therefore, I think that's very, very crucial as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember all the glycemic index of all the ingredients that we used to talk about. So many aspects to it. My
No,
God, amazing. So now another completely different consumer segment and even more challenging, if we could say. You have two kids. I have one kid who's become a teenager, but PD, we're talking kids and
yes,
kids nutrition and highly, highly competitive. I mean, that world has completely changed. What all is going online itself? Online only products are getting developed, sold even by the biggest players. So,
absolutely.
what were the key challenges for Celehealth launching very interesting guava flavored gummies?
Yeah, the gummies that we launched. Yeah. No, that's an interesting space again. And I've come from the same space, working with Nestle, also partly with Kellogg. I was working in the same segment. So I understand that space, and there are HFDs, there are MFDs, there are plethora of choices, and then you have and there's also this whole angle that we spoke about, how the relationship between the mother and the kid changes. The mother is almost like the custodian or the gatekeeper in the beginning, and then the child grows, develops their own thinking and their own choices, and then there is this whole pestering that happens, and then the whole equation then sways, and then it becomes more about the child throwing tantrums, the fussy eating, and all those things comes in, and therefore they often end up making the wrong choices. And the mother is always has a lot of angst and a lot of pain as to while she would ideally want to stop the kid from having those kind of products, but she caves in because the kid is pushing the mother. So therefore, this space is very interesting, and you see some of the concerns. Infections are rampant. And if you go a little, if you were to trace back as to why those infections are happening, again, you'll see it's because of the wrong choices, fussy eating, not enough variety in the food. I mean, typically we are living in nuclear families today. We don't have the variety in our food any longer, like what we used to do, maybe 20, 30 years back. So that is in there. And therefore, you're not getting adequate nutrition. And there's so much nutrition deprivation that happens. And then now you're hit with some of those MFDs and HFDs in the market and all those choices where it is laced with sugar. And I'm sorry to say, most of the products that you find, you will find in the labels 35-40% sugar. Now, then we said we just don't want to market another nutritional supplement saying it is good for the kid, but we really wanted to look at a space which was interesting and where we could really make an impact on the kid, and that's where we focused on recurrent infections. So the first thing we said is let's look at recurrent infections because that's a big problem. That's a massive problem. And it could be attributed to many things, nutritional deprivation, iron deficiency, vitamin A deficiency. So all those nutrition deficiencies leading to exposure in the environment. And post-COVID, we know the whole susceptibility of kids falling, to, getting sick has increased even more. So recurrent infection is the space that we took. And then we said, now, if this is the need gap, what can we do? There are MFTs, there are HFDs. What could we do? So we said, let's try and bring in some smart nutrients. Look at those nutrients that could be brought together in a very interesting format, because you wanted a format which was appreciated by the kid, and you also wanted to bring in nutrition which would be reassuring for the mother. So that's the whole combination that we wanted to bring in. We also focused on some of the micro and the macronutrients which were equally important, but were not delivered in the right way in some of the products that were available in the market. So we tried to also bring in that combination. And as I said, the format was very, very important because this would improve the compliance. The kids would love it. They would not see it as a medication while you are giving some value with the product. And that's where, we came to the solution of the gummies, which was launched. And I think this was probably one of the most disruptive products that we launched in this segment. So that's how we kind of brought this whole product to life as a team.
Yeah, and they were very cute teddy bear shapes.
Teddy bear shapes, and the packaging was very interesting. It was not the typical packaging, So everything about the product was very, very interesting.
PD, you started with how you are a constant, student of consumers, and they
Yes.
force us to be, because they are evolving and they are going to flirt with options, and they are going to evolve and challenge and question, and they will have their own logic. So this whole insight of the mother that I want something that the child will enjoy and is good for them makes
Yes,
them go every corner of the world. And
absolutely.
so many brands, food brands as well. Even I was, working on Britannia, the Laughing Cow.
Hmm.
It was relevant there, for a cheese, and here it's a nutrition product. And I'm saying, and it's a universal insight.
Absolutely.
And what a beautiful, product as a solution, because it's cute. The child, it's going to have pull factor with the child, and the mother is going to encourage. But of course, it seems simple, but there were so many aspects.
So much about that. So many aspects. Absolutely.
The doctor is going to come into the picture, not come into the picture. How many should the child have? And like you said, every few years, the child's mind state is changing.
Changing. Absolutely.
Suddenly the child is discovering the power of no. And then you're like, now what do I do? Then the peer pressure, and so where are we going to focus it? And the ingredients, like you said, so much to it, so much to it.
Absolutely.
Be differentiated yet familiar, be familiar yet have a twist. It's
absolutely
amazing. Be attractive and yet credible. So there's again a fine line there, because you don't want to be considered frivolous. So,
And that's where we brought in the angle of the doctor. So very important. You don't want to sound frivolous because although you're bringing high science here, you've done amazing work on the ingredients, but you don't want to make it frivolous. And you also want some relevance. So it should give the doctors a reason to prescribe. So therefore, you had to bring in the evidence also. So it was not just about the ingredient story, but how that translated into a certain benefit and an advantage for the kid was very important. So the doctor could prescribe, and also then making it very interesting for the mother that she felt reassured to kind of choose a brand and give it to the kid. So that is where the other angle came in. How do you do a smart messaging around it, and also then connect with the mother and keep the science relevance within that context. So so two things that we really had to look at while we kind of rolled out that product. Absolutely.
yeah, and very interestingly, when you talked about the infection aspect, that
Yes.
and focusing there, because I mean it's a ladder, that it will get to fussy eating, it'll get to this thing, but here we are talking about immunity and in fighting infection. So that was again a differentiated space that the mother could take a decision on, that yeah, this is
Yeah,
something.
and there could be some arguments on that immunity because if you typically look at how kids' nutrition has evolved, typically most of the brands would focus on the growth and development. They'll talk about smarter, sharper, taller, those kind of claims were there. And I think the discerning mother is now challenging that because she knows that that's not what's going to eventually lead to a smarter, taller, or a sharper kid, right? And then on top of it, then came the whole digestive, products. So where they said that it would offer better digestion, and then you had the whole probiotics and the prebiotic space emerging because of the digestive health. And the third space that emerged within the kids space was this whole immunity. Now, immunity basically, people spoke about nutrients, which everyone knew about, and some benefits from an immunity, but nothing tangible. And we also kind of looked at immunity in its entirety, and we saw that most of it was in terms of supportive care when it came to immunity. So the child had fallen sick while in the recovery stage, give this supplement so it helps in the recovery. And the whole thinking was that it would enhance the immunity. We said let's focus on something even more sharper around innate immunity. So innate immunity, along with the combination of adaptive immunity, is where we focused, and therefore the connection to the whole recurrent infections was much more sharper with the product. So yeah, I mean, and this comes in when you really go deep, not just in terms of the consumer understanding, but also in terms of the science, which is embedded within that entire conversation with the
Yeah.
consumer.
Yeah, and that is where it's different, marketing to a consumer who is looking for a solution of a problem, even if it is everyday maintenance and not really
Yes.
curative. There itself, there is a whole lot of science and mindset. And the evolved mother, especially because she's very savvy and she has
Yes.
access to, and she's really doing a lot of online research. So again, another challenge. And PD, when you were talking about online, this was more of an online uh, presence and an online launch. Was there anything unique that you had to take up for this?
No, so we did two things. So we said we'll keep the relevance going. As I said, we needed to give the doctors a reason to prescribe the product, and therefore we went with the doctors with a very strong science credential, evidence around the product, around Wellimmune, you're aware of. And then we also went online. So we also had a very sharp focus on the online. So we said let's also then put it on e-commerce and then also promote it through a social and digital platform and see what's the traction. And to be honest, and I don't know the current status of the product, but it was doing remarkably well. It was well accepted by the mothers. The initial response was amazing, both online, the kind of feedback that we got on the product, and the offline was also because doctors also felt very, very happy to prescribe the product because it was not just another frivolous, gummies that they came across. So yeah, I mean, we had both the arms working together. So it was a very well integrated thinking. We didn't go mass media, so we went with our choices very clearly. So there was online and there was this whole offline, which was with the doctors,
With the experts, because you
with the
really
experts.
cannot bypass them
You
anymore.
can't ask them.
And that was that has always been Dr. Reddy's strength,
Yeah.
the pharma division. Yeah. Okay. So shall we move behind in the journey? Shall we go back to Kellogg's and Nestle's?
Yes.
Completely different world, yet similar solutions to the consumer. It's interesting. The lens itself is going to be different. So, PD, Kellogg's, if you talk about, I mean, has been like the subject of case studies, what
Yes.
all they have brought and what all understanding they have brought and change of habits. And repositionings and, what they are looking at as the core of their marketing now is so
Yeah,
different from how they were looking at, which
absolutely.
itself, kind of unveils and the discovery of how culturally we are different and unique.
We know how the conflicts launch happened, and how long it took for India to really adapt to the conflicts finally, and there's this whole cultural angle to it, which I'm sure you're aware of. But coming to Kellogg, and the world's largest breakfast and snacking company, it was, and again, that's another school where I learned a lot about, let's say, innovation and design thinking. Thanks to my boss then, exposed me to that world. And during my stint with Kellogg, a couple of things that kind of was very important, to understand was, while I was leading a very big mandate, there was this whole master brand that I had to focus on. Also, there was a kids growth and development agenda that I had to drive. But there were a couple of initiatives that I needed to run in the region. And for this, what was important to do was to really understand the market. The market analysis was very important, going beyond the typical demographic and the psychographic analysis, going a little bit more deeper in terms of understanding the cultural nuances, the competitive landscape, the practices and the behaviors and ethnographic emotions. So we went through that entire journey. So the whole idea was really to define what the problem was, because unless and until you really understand the problem, what are you really going to solve for? And sometimes we tend to take a solutions and then retrofit them, right? So that the thinking was really go deep in terms of this whole analysis. The second part was really understanding the consumer behavior analysis. So we did a lot of deep work around the consumer behavior analysis, understanding the cultural preferences, some of the dietary habits, and then also going into the kind of choices that they made and why they made. So spending time with the consumers in their world and really getting that context. The third was really then going out there and checking on the behavior, their behaviors, the buying behaviors. Why would they make a certain decision? What compelled them to make the decision? Who are the key influencers? What their ecosystem looked like. So those were the things that we also kind of got into. And then finally looking at some of the trends. So each of the region, I mean, within the region you would have so much variances, but within countries also you have so much variances with respect to the trends, whether it's the health and the wellness trend. We know the trends like better for you. We saw that evolution from a better for you to a better for me, which was about self motivation and personal responsibility, to becoming better for us, which was more about taking collective responsibility. So we saw those trends emerge and they were varying across those countries. And some great work that we did, and one of the examples that I kind of wanted to share was the live clinical, similar to what Lifebuoy did with their entire malnutrition thing. So we did something very similar, going and interacting with kids in a school, and really understanding why they were skipping the breakfast and or the skimping as we call it, partially having the breakfast but not fully that nutritious breakfast that they would need. So we did that and we really understood what it really did to them. So the performance in the school was deteriorating. It led to absenteeism in the long term. They would have infections. They would get sick more often than the other kids who were having the breakfast properly. Their performance or the grades were not as great. They would be extremely tired, and there would be a lot of fatigue. Their performance, even in sports, was not that great. So we realized that how important a good nutritious breakfast could be. So we did this whole ethnographic immersion, live clinical study, and through that we demonstrated how having a good nutrition could make a deep impact. And then again, generating that evidence. Once you gave that proper breakfast, observing their behavior over a period of 3 to 6 months, and then seeing tangible benefits that the breakfast was delivering them, good nutritious breakfast was delivering them, and then using that as a real case study versus sitting in rooms and then creating those amazing narratives and stories which goes out in the media. So we took those real stories and then we crafted kind of an advertisement around it, and then demonstrated it to the public. So that was something that we did, and which was this live clinical back in Kellogg.
Yeah, so like you painted this whole thing, this whole understanding, PD, is not sunk in fully, that what we eat, the 25% of that brain is taking,
Yes.
and because of this whole junk that we are eating, the gut bacteria ecosystem is what's inducing anxiety and depression.
Oh, absolutely.
Research is that your thoughts are so much affected by what you're eating.
Absolutely.
So how is the kid to be nurtured? Even I mean, if the tiffin is the only area where you have control, like look at the challenge that the mother has.
Yes.
Otherwise, they are being induced and tempted. There's so many influences, television, friends, birthday parties, and relatives spoiling you. But tiffin is something where the child will have to eat what you're giving. But if their palate is such that they say no, I mean, like the whole day is gone. So all
Absolutely.
this obsession that mothers have over the tiffin is so justified.
Justified, absolutely.
So
And the gut is the second brain. I mean, it's actually the second brain. I mean, and we now have so much evidence to show the whole gut and brain axis. I mean, you are what you eat. 70-80% of our immunity comes from the gut. So, so food and nutrition is so important. I mean, you might be going to the gym, you might be doing all the regular practices, but you'll still not be losing weight, or you might not be at the peak of your cognitive abilities because it's of the nutrition that you're not taking in. So it's so important that your diet and nutrition needs to complement your physical exercise and everything else that you do. Otherwise, you never feel good about yourself. So
yeah.
absolutely.
I also did a stint with the JWT, and Kellogg's was one of the brands. I didn't work on the brand, but as friends, and this whole Juhi Chawla commercial had come that the child is saying, please don't put brinjal on pizza. I remember we used PD, if you remember the whole the strategies that the mother has, to make the child have good food, from
Absolutely.
masking to hiding,
Yes, with the good nutrition and stuff,
what
right?
is, yeah, to
Smartly,
creative stories, all of that, and it's never gonna go. I think
never going to
10
go.
years later also, how much technology you'll bring in, mother's struggle will be the same. Kids degrees will vary.
Yeah, and so, I mean, to be honest, I mean, the kid would not change. Kids, even in the future, would also have the same issues and the same problems. But it starts with the fact that maybe our understanding on nutrition itself or on food itself is very limited. And there's an interesting concept when it comes to the initial phase, which is known as flavor bridging. You need to introduce a food 4 to 5 times before it gets accepted. Sometimes you would also find allergies happening, but when you do repeated exposure of the same food over a period of time, those allergies tend to disappear. Also, what you find is some foods might be disliked, but because you've introduced them early, at a later period, the same foods are appreciated by the kid. So there is a memory that the kid would have about this food, which stays embedded. So therefore, it's so important that because the child is disliking a food or not appreciating something, the mother still needs to invest the time and not just mask it with taste. There, because if we all know, kids don't have any taste to begin with. In the initial first couple of years, right? It's we that create the taste, and we are so biased towards what tasty food is and what food when a food is not tasty, and those biases actually then kind of gets rubbed onto the kid. So in a lot of ways we need to blame ourselves, and it's not the kid. Otherwise, I think we would have a far more healthier generation than we have today.
And I think metros mothers have to work harder because we
Oh,
we had our nani used to be at our farms. They used to come there from Kolkata, PD. So, they were lawyers and they would come there for months and they would be growing vegetables. So we would be spending our summers there and we'd be, along with them plucking dudhi from the. So we had to eat dudhi because we plucked it with the nanaji. And something would come from Ambala especially for us, so we would also, okay, let's try it out. So whole diverse food palette development happened early, and if that access schools could give to kids, or parents could give, that that relationship with the mother earth and diverse food growing, and hence what's real food and how good it is for you,
yes,
that can also be a big shift. And now I all appreciate this whole work that Nestle did, PD, as a microsite for
yes,
giving recipe ideas and educating mothers so much more.
absolutely.
So interesting. Now, from gummy nutrition to breakfast
To,
cereals,
to breakfast cereals, and then yeah, to your question on Nestle
baby
and
food. Oh
baby,
my God.
absolutely baby food. I mean, we all grew up having one product or the other from Nestle, right? I mean, that's the familiarity that I had with the company even before joining them. And I was fortunate enough to lead a very big category. You know, the baby food, the cereals. We were 96% of the category in the country. You know, you asked me about what the challenge was. So we were 96% of the category. The category was on a decline. You know, so there was no competition as such. We had competition. Some of those players emerged and they disappeared. You know, at one point in time, FedEx was extremely strong, but then that's another story where Cerelac completely swept the market and they became the market leaders. So the only thing that was happening, there was some value growth that was happening, but that value growth was attributed to pricing corrections, you know, and some rework that we did on the packaging, so which was kind of bringing back some of the margins, and that is the only growth that we were having, but muted growth again. Second, the focus for on the baby foods or the cereals was primarily on extending the journey. So I think we just overdid that entire extension, you know, with the staging, and then there was some science behind it, but I think we just did too much of segmentation to really make an impact on the mother as well as the healthcare community at large. And we also found through the data there was a lot of lapsage that was happening within 3 to 4 months. So kids came in and then kids kind of moved out, and the category was losing relevance. You know, the whole brand was built on mass media. So there was a huge amount of mass media that used to happen, let's say 25, 30 years back, and then the code came in. So regulations became very, very strict, and therefore the mass media disappeared. The HCP communication started, but everything was slightly understated, you know, from our end. And the discerning mother also became more and more clear that they had better options. And obviously, you know, at home you may get more variety versus what you would get in a packaged cereal like that. So therefore, the challenge for us as a team, for me and the team, was what's the real problem we were trying to solve for, you know. And then we really went back into the data. It was not just doing the whole inciting work around the from the data that we had, but also looking at some of the public health data that was there around the same time. So we saw iron deficiency anemia being a massive concern. You know, kids below 5 years, 75 to 80% of the kids were suffering from iron deficiency anemia, and it had both short to mid to long term implications. Then we found that fortified cereals was a great solve in a lot of the Western countries to resolve some of these concerns, you know, when it came, because supplementation typically never worked, because supplementation always had issues with compliance. So you look at the iron supplementation, and if you see the results over the last 40, 50 odd years, you know, only 13.5 or 14% of the kids have benefited. So there's something that is seriously wrong with supplementation. So then we saw that there was a relevance of fortified cereals to come and address this big public health issue. And then we said, okay, now if we look at the first 2 years, which is the most important phase for the kid, what do we need to do? You know, kids are coming in. Is there a compelling reason for the kids to come in? So what is the story that we are sharing on our cereals, you know, or on our baby food? So do we need to recraft that, make it a lot more relevant from a science standpoint? So that was the work that we did around the communication, and a huge amount of work that was done by the team. Second is we looked at the whole staging that we had and said, since kids were lapsing out so early, could we extend the journey up to 24 months? Because you really wanted to hold them and offer them the right nutrition till that 24 months. So that was the whole focus, you know, for us, and therefore we launched a stage 5, which kind of helped us address this in a big way, and we were able to kind of extend the journey to a large extent. And the third one was that how do we then extend this journey beyond this 24 months and look at using the media as a vehicle, because you really wanted to communicate on malnutrition, you wanted to communicate on iron deficiency, you also wanted to address the concerns of the kid, because the kid cannot consume so much food. Stomach capacity is very small. It's almost like my fist. And then you're asking the kid to take in so much amount of nutrition, so which means more food. Therefore, you have to make the food a lot more dense and nutritious. So therefore, then using that as through the media and communicating directly with the mother. So that was the whole thinking for us to kind of extend the journey beyond 24 months and then launch Grow, which happened eventually. So that's the kind of work that we did, and which helped bring the category relevance back, drive growths, and I'm sure the team. And then again, the whole premiumization mainstream, which is where the focus was kind of. There was also another, Gerber, which was introduced. I'm sure now you would find this in the outlets in the country. So all that happened later on, but the initial thinking was around how do we get the relevance back on the category.
Yeah, and such a huge challenge. Such a huge
Absolutely.
challenge. So much sensitivity required to the mother and how she thinks about the baby. And I'm sure understanding from so many stakeholders, doctors, product development, innovation, and getting it right, and clinical trials. I'm sure there'd be just so much work to get the product right, to fundamentally change how the mother is looking at as a product in terms of what
Absolutely.
role it is going to play in my baby's life.
Absolutely.
We say the baby is your heart. And
Absolutely.
at that point in time, the mother is so unsure. There's no school teaching her, and she is just doing trial and error. And what
She's learning from me, absolutely. But I think, culture also teaches her. I think I mean, if you just go back into a cultural context and you see how we were having our food, we had a huge amount of variety on the table. We had this whole concept of five color, five taste. You would have you would have the carb or the rice in the middle, and then you would have the bowls on each side, which would have a lot of variety, right? And there was also a certain way that we had to consume our food. So therefore nutrition was there, and we changed that plate. Again, it's coming back into a pyramid where then we started looking at the West, how they thought about nutrition, which was more from a calorific point of view. So I think that changed the paradigm for us, and that's where we probably did a lot of disservice to our mothers in a very big way, because we started talking of things which were not pure. I mean, they seemed like being scientific, but they didn't have the evidence. So the evidence was always in the plate, and today you see the food plate has again come back, right? So I think culturally we had a lot of the understanding, but probably we didn't have the science rationale now, which is coming in and supporting some of our cultural practices. Yes.
like when Arujuta Dibekar talks about
Yes.
the fact that local food, you have enzymes for it.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
relevant not just if you're traveling west within the country. If you're moving from you're a North Indian, you're moving south, that it's relevant then also. And most of the young people are migrants. Like they migrated to some city or the other, and somehow they stay in that
Absolutely.
phase till they decide to settle, and that might not be their birthplace. So this whole thing of the thali that you're saying is so powerful. And the
Absolutely.
seven colors as per the seven chakras, feeding your
Yes.
chakras, as they say,
Yes.
is amazing wisdom. And I loved when you said, PD, that we've done disservice to the mother, and wherein you are saying the nani and the dadis, because they would say, "Pehle mat don't have it now, have it after this." This, like you suggested, the sequentiality
The
of what.
sequentiality of foods to be introduced. Absolutely. And
And
even look at our, the celebration of the Anna Prashana. So, which happens at 4 months and 6 months. There's so much rational to it. Today, the West is realizing the importance of the Anna Prashana and where carbohydrate like rice or wheat gets introduced, and what it could do if you're introducing it early or you're introducing it too late. All that was there with us. Somehow our ancestors knew about it, but we lost those practices. But I think it's coming back because now science is kind of giving us that evidence, why you should then introduce a certain cereal or a certain food at a certain time and what it could do.
must say that that was such a diverse journey into food, nutrition, all phases of being human. So, dear audience, now PD is another avatar of his. He's going to introduce ourselves to metaphysics, mindfulness, and we, as an audience, would like to know what fascinated you, what got you into it, and what you wish everybody experiences, whether they are marketing leaders, corporate, warriors, or just human beings in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I talk on mindfulness, the art of synchronous living, right? So, which is the TED talk. Now, just imagine a world. I mean, if I were to just kind of draw a picture, just try and imagine a world where every word we speak aligns seamlessly with our actions. Let this seep in and try and understand what I'm maybe trying to say here is, and just imagine the kind of harmonious and authentic existence that it would create, where your every word connects to your, your every action. So that was the genesis of this entire thinking around mindfulness. This is the essence of mindful living. We use, which is conscious living, which is a synchronous dance between our language and behavior. And I'm deeply intrigued with this whole thinking around behavior. The part of the brain that controls our behavior does not control language. So therefore, we are not able to articulate most often why we really do, and why, what's the reason behind it. So we are never able to rationalize that. And this is where the power of language comes in. Now, language shapes a reality. We know that, right? Just think of it. The difference between saying "I have to" versus "I get to" can dramatically transform a task from being a burden or an opportunity. Just that little shift, right? So, therefore, language shapes a reality. It's not just a tool of communication, but a powerful force that can shape the way we look and perceive things around us. Then the second is this mindful language, where you're extremely conscious of what you're saying. You're more intentional with your words, with your expressions, and it should ensure that you're reflecting your true intentions and values through it. So, again, another example, saying that I'm busy versus saying that I'm prioritizing my time. Such a different shift and a different perspective altogether, right? So that's the whole thinking behind this whole topic that I had, and I went a little bit more deeper, which your audience can check the TED talk and see for themselves. But I would just try and bring in some practical steps, since you asked me, to this whole mindful living. So there are three things that I would like to kind of reinforce. One is this whole intentional speaking, which I kind of understood. It's not just enough to be mindful, but also have the ability to choose the words that truly reflects your intentions and your values. It should deeply connect with you when you're saying something. The other idea there is also pause before speaking. Most often than not, we just go on rambling out, right? We wait even before we've heard the other person. We are in that state of expressing ourselves. We just want to make a point. So it's always very important that you pause before you speak to ensure that your words really land and are aligned with your beliefs. So that for me is the first one. The second one is reflective listening. Listening actively and reflect on what others are saying before responding. Now, this will also then ensure that you are seen as being very thoughtful and considerate in your approach. This can completely shift the entire paradigm and how people look and perceive, someone. And the last one is the aligned actions. So it's fine, I mean, with your, when you talk about intentional speaking and reflective listening, but if your actions are not aligned, they are not in sync, then there is a problem. Therefore, it is very important to regularly evaluate, do an audit very frequently as to if your behaviors are consistent to what you are saying and how you are and your beliefs. If they are not, then it is time that you kind of address that, because otherwise things can really go wrong. And how you could do that is keeping a journal. Track your commitments, reflect on how well your actions have been aligned with your words, and how your words have actually transformed your action. So I think that audit is extremely important, just to show that you're progressing in the right direction.
Okay, so that was brilliant. Great tips to even the intention to want to live mindfully is amazing, isn't it, PD? The quality of relationships and life itself can really be 10x. And PD, there's a word in Japanese. It says kotodama.
I heard about it. Yep.
You heard the word? So, which is like use pure words. It never say mean and bad words. Even if you're feeling
Yes.
bad, you just wait, let it reflect, think from the other person's point of view, then use words that will empower a good action.
Yeah.
Are you ready for this?
Oh, yes, I saw this weapon, being unleashed on a few of your guests, so I can imagine what's coming my way.
So be rapid and be fiery, PD. And let's see how you do. You're ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Awesome. Mother's best advice.
Mother's milk is the best.
Yay. Coming from a nutrition guy.
Yes.
Okay. Alternate profession could have been?
I would have probably been an entrepreneur.
Hmm.
Yeah, when I was growing up, I was thinking about becoming a cricketer, but more realistically, I would think I would have become an entrepreneur. I would have done something on my own.
Oh, not a footballer. Interesting. Okay. What would you do on Mars for fun?
Probably take a land Mars rover and just go around the planet Mars, explore every terrain, try and find out what the planet looks like. So
And,
that's what I would do.
and an opportunity for an enterprise, maybe.
Absolutely.
As per your wife, your most often used phrase?
Wait, I'm going to do it. So she says, I've been waiting for a long time and you're still doing it.
I'm sure you get out of that very nicely. Okay. One thing no one knows about you.
I'm a fairly good cook. My wife knows it, but and she's seen me do it a couple of times. But I'm a fairly good cook. I can cook quite a few dishes.
Yay. We're coming. We're coming. Okay. A book you'd like to gift to all your friends.
Start with Why by Simon Sinek.
Hmm.
I think it had a profound impact on me when I read the book in 2012 when I picked up the book the first time.
Awesome.
2012, 2013, yes.
PD, I've picked up his next one, Infinite Gains.
Oh, amazing. I
Amazing.
heard his talk before the book got released. It's an amazing talk. And the
Yeah.
book, absolutely.
What's something new happening in your life right now?
I'm planning to write a book. Been planning for a while, but I think I've become a little bit more serious in the last couple of months. Yeah.
Okay, so this is a moment on Jagged with Jastravi. He has a jagged edge right there for you. Breaking news. Do you want to share what's going to be about?
So it's on being resilient. Becoming resilient. I think that's the book on. It's going to cover a lot of my personal experience.
Here, for the first time on Jagged with Jastravi, guys, you heard it. We'll meet you again, PD, with the book.
Oh, absolutely. So
Okay.
you put that out of me.
Yeah. Yeah. See, that's the intent of the channel. Okay. If you were to devote the rest of your life to philanthropy, what cause would you choose?
Women empowerment. I think they make a massive difference to our society, not just in our families, but to the society, the community, and the country at large, globally as well. And I think we, as Indians, we are yet to do enough to really empower women.
Okay. What is your greatest joy?
Just playing with my kid, my younger one, and my elder one.
Okay. So, PD, it's a wrap up now.
Yeah.
Please, if you could share any online addresses where people could reach out to you.
You still find me on Twitter or X, as you call it, at Proshanjit01. You'll also find me on LinkedIn. There I'm a lot more active. Facebook and Instagram, the usual channels. Amazing work that you're doing, Just Ravi. Jagged with Just Ravi, as you said, living on the edge, pushing the envelope and trying and bringing conversations that are very meaningful and able to strike a chord, with your audience. So I think you're doing exemplary work. The lineup of people that you've had in the recent past, exemplary. I really urge the people, the folks out there to go and look at some of the content that you've created, some of the conversations that you've had, and really gather a lot of insights from that. And I urge everyone to follow Jagged with Just Ravi, subscribe to the channel, and follow this channel because this is an amazing podcast. Thank you so much, Just Ravi, for giving me this opportunity and having me on your show.
Awesome, PD. And this marks a transition from PD as a client to PD as part of my community. Yay, PD.